The fluorescent lights of Northwood Academy's hallways hummed a sterile, indifferent tune. They gleamed off the polished mahogany honor rolls and the professionally framed photos of alumni who had gone on to become senators and CEOs. This was a place built on the architecture of expectation, a world where legacy was currency and status was the air you breathed. For Amara, a new student on a scholarship she hadn't asked for, the air was suffocating. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, a shadow clinging to the edges of a world too bright, too loud, too sure of itself. Her quietness was a shield, forged in the silent, hollow space left behind by her grandmother's passing 3 months prior. Her grandmother, who had filled their tiny apartment with the scent of sweet potato pie and the earth-shaking power of gospel hymns. Now, silence was all Amara had left of her. The whispers followed her like static. They were low, insidious, clinging to the fabric of her second-hand blazer. The architects of these whispers were a trio led by Tiffany Davenport, a girl whose blonde hair was as bright and sharp as her insults. Tiffany was Northwood royalty. Her father chaired the board, and her name was already unofficially engraved on the lead role of every school play and the top prize of every competition. She, along with her 2 disciples, Jessica and Chloe, patrolled the halls with an unnerving sense of ownership. They saw Amara not as a person, but as a smudge on their pristine canvas, an error in the exclusive equation of their world. The bullying was a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts. A tray accidentally knocked from her hands in the bustling cafeteria, splattering milk and mashed potatoes across her uniform. A textbook misplaced from her locker moments before a critical exam. The snickers that erupted in a carefully orchestrated chorus whenever she was called on in class. Her soft voice swallowed by the cavernous room before she could even finish a sentence. Amara never retaliated. She would simply clean up the mess, absorb the failing grade, and retreat further into herself. Complaining felt futile. Who would listen to a ghost? Who would believe a shadow of a sun? The heart of the school, at least for Tiffany, was the music department, presided over by none other than her own aunt, Mrs. Eleanor Davenport. Mrs. Davenport was a woman of severe posture and strained smiles, a conductor who valued precision over passion and pedigree over potential. She saw music not as an art, but as a competition, another arena for the well-bred to excel. Her prize pupil was, of course, Tiffany, whose voice was technically flawless, a perfectly tuned instrument that hit every note with crystalline accuracy. But it was a voice without a soul, a beautiful, empty vessel. Amara loved the music room. It was the one place where she felt a flicker of her old self. She would sometimes stay late, long after the orchestra had packed up and the choir had dispersed, and just sit at the grand piano in the corner. She wouldn't play. She would just rest her fingers on the cool ivory keys, close her eyes, and try to hear her grandmother's voice again, a rich and resonant alto that could make the floorboards tremble and the spirit soar. It was a voice that held stories of struggle and joy, a voice that had taught Amara that a song was not just a collection of notes, but the sound of a soul telling its truth. One afternoon, a flyer appeared on the main bulletin board, its crisp, embossed lettering announcing the annual Founders' Day Gala. The centerpiece of the gala was a Northwood Star talent competition. The grand prize was a university scholarship and a solo performance at the city's most prestigious concert hall. For most, it was a chance at glory. For Tiffany, it was a coronation. Her name was already being whispered as the guaranteed winner. Mrs. Davenport had made sure of it, assigning Tiffany the most complex and showy aria in the classical repertoire, a piece designed to showcase her technical prowess. Seeing the flyer, Amara felt a pang of something she hadn't felt in months, a dull, aching desire. The scholarship was a dream, a way out, a path her grandmother had always wanted for her. But the thought of standing on that stage, of subjecting herself to the 1,000 pairs of judging eyes, felt like standing naked in a blizzard. Impossible. She turned to walk away, but her fingers brushed against the small, worn locket she wore around her neck. Inside was a tiny, folded picture of her grandmother, her face crinkled in a wide, loving smile. Amara could almost hear her voice, a gentle rumble in her memory. Don't you ever let nobody silence the music God put inside you, baby girl. Your voice is your power. For the first time in months, A spark ignited in the cold emptiness of her grief. It was a tiny, fragile flame, but it was there. She would audition, not for them, not for the scholarship, but for her grandmother, to prove that the music had not died with her. The auditions were held in the main auditorium. The air was thick with nervous energy and the smell of hairspray. One by one, students performed, their talents ranging from clumsy magic tricks to surprisingly adept violin solos. Tiffany, naturally, was given the prime slot. She strode onto the stage, her confidence a physical force, and delivered her aria. Every note was perfect. Every trill was executed with mechanical precision. The room applauded politely. Mrs. Davenport, seated at the judge's table, beamed as if she were watching sunrise. Her pen scribbled furiously on her notepad. Flawless, a true artist. When Amara's name was called, a ripple of snickers went through the remaining students. The mouse is going to squeak for us. Tiffany whispered loudly to Jessica, who stifled a laugh behind her hand. Amara walked towards the stage, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. She carried no sheet music, no instrument. It was just her. "And what will you be performing for us, miss?" Mrs. Davenport asked, peering over her glasses, her tone dripping with bored impatience. She hadn't bothered to learn Amara's last name. "A song," Amara said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's an old one." "Well, get on with it. We don't have all day." Amara stood in the center of the stage, the single spotlight feeling like an interrogation lamp. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened her mouth. What came out was not the polished, theatrical sound Mrs. Davenport was accustomed to. It was something else entirely. It was raw, steeped in sorrow, a melody that felt ancient and deeply personal. It was a quiet, a cappella rendition of "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child," a spiritual her grandmother had sung to her on nights when the world felt too heavy. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled the cavernous space. It quivered with a vulnerability that was so naked, so honest. It was almost uncomfortable to witness. It was a sound of heartbreak, of longing, of a soul laid bare. She only sang for a minute, just a single verse and chorus, before Mrs. Davenport's sharp voice cut through the air. "Thank you. That's enough." Amara's eyes snapped open. Mrs. Davenport was looking at her not with appreciation, but with something akin to disdain. "That was very morbid, dear," she said, her lips pursed. "The Founders' Day Gala is a celebration. We're looking for something uplifting, something that showcases technical skill. Not that." She made a dismissive gesture with her hand, as if shooing away a bad smell. Tiffany and her friends were now laughing openly. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over Amara. She wanted the stage to swallow her whole. She mumbled a thank you and fled, the sound of their laughter chasing her down the hall. Later that day, the list of finalists was posted. To Amara's utter astonishment, her name was on it. It was at the very bottom, scrawled in as if an afterthought. She later learned that Mr. Henderson, the young, idealistic history teacher, who was also a judge, had fought for her. "The point of art isn't just to be pretty, Eleanor," he had argued. "It's to make you feel something. And that girl, she made me feel something." Reluctantly, and only to appear fair, Mrs. Davenport had conceded, burying Amara in the opening slot of the show, the death slot, when people were still finding their seats and chatting. A performance designed to be forgotten. The news of Amara's inclusion sent Tiffany into a quiet fury. The smudge was refusing to be erased. She saw it as a personal insult. How dare this nobody, this charity case, presume to share a stage with her? The bullying escalated, growing crueler and more calculated. They cornered her in the library, knocking a stack of books from her arms. "Practicing for your big performance?" Chloe sneered. "Maybe you can sing about the Dewey Decimal System. It'd be more interesting than that funeral dirge you sang." The day before the gala, the final humiliation was set in motion. Amara was in the music room, trying to practice. She was holding her grandmother's locket, rubbing the smooth metal between her thumb and forefinger as she hummed, a nervous habit that grounded her. She set it down on the piano for just a moment to grab her water bottle. In that split second, Tiffany, who had been watching from the doorway, saw her opportunity. She strode in, followed by Jessica. "Oh, look what we have here," Tiffany said, her voice a venomous purr. She picked up a locket. "How quaint. Is this real silver? Or did it come from a cereal box?" "Please," Amara whispered, her heart pounding. "Give it back. Give it back." Tiffany feigned a thoughtful look. "I don't know. I think it would look much better on me." She made a show of trying to clasp it around her own neck. "Don't," Amara pleaded, stepping forward. "Or maybe," Tiffany said, a malicious glint in her eye, "it would look better on the floor." With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the locket onto the hard, unforgiving tile. The delicate chain snapped. The locket itself flew open, the tiny picture of her grandmother dislodging and skittering under the piano. A sound, a raw cry of anguish, tore from Amara's throat. She dropped to her knees, frantically searching for the photo. At that exact moment, Mrs. Davenport walked in. She took in the scene. Tiffany and Jessica standing with looks of feigned shock, and Amara on the floor, weeping. "What on earth is going on here?" Mrs. Davenport demanded. "Aunt Eleanor, it was horrible," Tiffany said, her voice shaking with manufactured distress. "She just threw her necklace on the ground and started screaming. I think she's having some sort of breakdown. The pressure must be getting to her." Mrs. Davenport's gaze fell on Amara, not with concern, but with cold, hard judgment. "Get up, young lady. This is a music hall, not a psychiatric ward. This kind of outburst is completely unacceptable. If you cannot handle the pressures of a simple school competition, then you clearly do not belong on my stage." "But she—" Amara started, tears streaming down her face, holding the broken locket in her palm. "I don't want to hear it." Mrs. Davenport cut her off. "I saw what I saw. You are this close to being disqualified. Pull yourself together, or don't bother showing up tomorrow." She then turned and placed a comforting arm around her niece. "Don't you worry, Tiffany. Some people simply aren't cut out for this world." They swept out of the room, leaving Amara alone on the floor, the broken pieces of her only connection to her grandmother lying in her hand. The tiny flame of hope that had ignited within her was extinguished, drowned in a fresh wave of grief and despair. She wouldn't perform. She couldn't. They had finally broken her. She would just disappear, just as they always wanted. The night of the Founders' Day Gala arrived. The auditorium was a sea of expensive suits, shimmering dresses, and the faint scent of perfume. Backstage, the air was electric with a mix of terror and excitement. Amara wasn't there. She was in her small, quiet room, staring at the wall, the broken locket on her nightstand. She had decided. She wasn't going. Let them have their world. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Your grandmother wouldn't want you to let them win. She wants you to sing your truth, so loud it shakes their world." It was from Mr. Henderson. He must have gotten her number from the school files. His words hung in the air, simple and profound. "Sing your truth." She looked at the locket. She thought of her grandmother's hands, strong and gentle, clapping in time as she sang. She thought of her voice, how to fill a room with so much love it felt like it could heal any wound. And she realized they hadn't broken the locket. They had just broken a chain. The memory, the love, the music, that was all still inside her. They couldn't touch that. With a sudden, fierce resolve, Amara stood up. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a shadow. She was her grandmother's legacy. And she was going to sing. She arrived just as the host was announcing the first performer. "And now, to open our show, please welcome Amara Jones." He looked around, confused. "Is Amara Jones here?" From the side of the stage, Amara stepped into the light. She wasn't wearing a fancy dress, just a simple black one. Her hair was pulled back. She looked small and fragile in the vastness of the stage. A murmur went through the audience. Tiffany, watching from the wings, rolled her eyes and smirked at Chloe. She actually showed up. This is going to be embarrassing. Amara walked to the center of the stage, ignoring the microphone stand. The stage manager rushed over. "Miss, you need the mic?" "I won't need it," she said softly. The manager shrugged and retreated. Amara stood there for a moment, the silence of the auditorium stretching into an awkward eternity. The audience began to shift in their seats, whispering. She closed her eyes, clutching the mended locket taped back together in her hand. She wasn't just singing for her grandmother anymore. She was singing for every quiet person who had ever been dismissed, for every voice that had ever been silenced. And then she began. There was no introduction, no musical accompaniment, just her voice, starting as a low, mournful hum. It was a sound that seemed to rise from the very earth, ancient and resonant. It was a song her grandmother had taught her, a hymn of sorrow and survival, a story of pain and perseverance passed down through generations. It was a song that didn't ask for permission to be heard. It commanded it. The voice that filled the auditorium was not the timid, hesitant whisper from the audition. This was a force of nature. It was a torrent of raw, untamed emotion, channeled through a voice that was clearer than crystal, stronger than steel, and richer than velvet. It soared into the rafters, a primal cry of grief that was so pure, so profoundly human, that it bypassed the ears and went straight to the heart. Every note was infused with the pain of her loss, the sting of every insult, the weight of every dismissal. The whispers in the audience died. The restless shuffling stopped. A silence, so profound it felt like a physical weight descended upon the room. People lowered their champagne glasses. Their polite smiles faded, replaced by expressions of stunned, wide-eyed awe. They were not just hearing a song. They were witnessing an exorcism. They were feeling a story. In the wings, Tiffany's smirk had vanished, her face a mask of disbelief. This wasn't the mousy, weak girl she had tormented. This was something else. This was power. Jessica and Chloe stared, their mouths agape. Mrs. Davenport, seated in the front row, looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her face was pale, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. The sound she had dismissed as morbid had transformed into something sublime, something terrifyingly beautiful. She had been judging a diamond as if it were a common stone, and now, under the pressure and the heat of the stage lights, it was shining with a brilliance that blinded her. Amara's voice built, note by powerful note, from a lament of sorrow to a declaration of strength. The final note was not a triumphant crescendo, but a soft, sustained hum that hung in the air for what felt like a lifetime, shimmering with resilience before fading into absolute silence. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the world had stopped, holding its breath in the wake of what it had just witnessed. And then, a single person in the back began to clap. Then another, and another. Within moments, the entire auditorium erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. A standing ovation that was not just an appreciation of talent, but a recognition of truth. People were weeping. Strangers were looking at each other, their faces etched with shared, unspoken understanding. They had just seen a soul. The judges were speechless. The city's esteemed music critic, a man known for his harsh reviews, was on his feet, clapping so hard his hands were red. He turned to the school's headmaster, seated beside him. "Who is that girl?" he demanded, his voice filled with urgency. "Where has she been hiding?" Later in the show, Tiffany performed. She took the stage, visibly shaken, and sang her aria. Every note was, as always, perfect. But after what the audience had just experienced, her technical perfection sounded hollow, sterile, and meaningless. The soul had left the building, and all that was left were empty notes. The applause was a mere echo of the thunderous ovation Amara had received. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Amara won. It wasn't even a competition. The music critic offered her a personal mentorship on the spot and secured her the scholarship himself, calling her a generational talent. But the real justice came quietly behind the scenes. Mr. Henderson, emboldened by Amara's courage, went to the headmaster and told him everything he had witnessed. The bullying, Mrs. Davenport's blatant favoritism, the broken locket incident. He wasn't the only one. A student who had been in the music room and seen Tiffany throw the locket came forward, her guilt finally outweighing her fear. The truth, one son aloud, had a way of making others brave. An investigation was launched. Tiffany was suspended, her social crown shattered not by a rival, but by her own cruelty. Her legacy at Northwood would forever be tarnished by the story of the quiet girl she tried to break. Mrs. Davenport was forced to take an indefinite leave of absence, her career and reputation in tatters. Her greatest sin was not her bias, but her inability to recognize true artistry when it was right in front of her, choosing to listen to the sound of privilege instead of the sound of a human heart. Amara never sought revenge. She didn't have to. She had found something far more powerful: her voice. She had walked the fire of their hatred and emerged not burned but forged. She learned that her quietness was not a weakness, but a well from which she drew her strength. And she learned that a song, sung with enough truth, could not only leave a room speechless, but could also tear down walls, expose lies, and change the world. The quietest voices often carry the most powerful truths, and the deepest art is born not from perfection, but from the beautiful, messy, and undeniable truth of human experience. This story is a testament to the fact that true power is not inherited or granted. It is found in the courage to sing your own song, especially when the world is trying to silence you. Privilege is a fragile shield against the raw, unyielding force of authentic talent. And in the end, the stages we build to celebrate status can become the very platforms that expose its emptiness. If you believe in the power of truth to overcome privilege and want to see more stories where the underestimated find their voice, subscribe to our channel and join a community that celebrates the triumph of the human spirit.